happy to have you on board to help with a lot of these details. So welcome. It's amazing to see all these faces on my gallery, and I have to go 2 pages to see even when I'm in my large gallery. So that's a good sign. We really appreciate you all being here today. Today is our day we receive information about workforce equality and the work that that work group has done over the past few months. And I know you received some information in your email and hopefully had a chance to review some of that. I will say we called this group Workforce and Quality, but the workforce issues ended up taking up virtually all the space. And that's okay, because we know that the quality of any classroom in an educational setting is intimately tied to the quality of the worker and that professional in front of them. So they're tightly tied, and quality hits, as we said, these 4 buckets are very much overlapping. So quality really hits all of them. We want to have an honest discussion today about the content. I will say to the panel members, and we're open to your direction too, but we've had very positive feedback this week from our open session Monday night. And then last night we had an open session in Eastern Connecticut to hear about their specific challenges with childcare. And the sentiment from the field is gratefulness. They feel a genuine open process. Many are on this call today. All the panel members are open to the public. We have a feedback form on our website. So if you hear something today, you want to send us feedback. I know last night one of the providers greeted me with a 2-page double-sided recommendations sheet that I handed to Eloisa to integrate into our feedback. So we're so grateful for the members of the field who are already working so hard in giving us feedback. But panel members should know that this process and the way it's set up is appreciated. This has been a very rapid process with tight timelines, and we've been meeting with panel members one-on-one, and we've heard from you that this is a tight timeline and you're feeling some of that pressure. And I think I started our first meeting by saying pressure is a privilege. And it is such an important issue for our state. We don't have 2 years to have a plan. We need to get a plan sooner rather than later, one that's achievable, and start moving forward. So what's going to happen? The first part of the agenda for today is we'll provide some goals and guideposts from the Workforce and Quality Work Group. And then we're so lucky to be joined today by Rhian Allvin, who is our expert today. And that was some other feedback we heard from you, that you really appreciate the learning and hearing from national experts. So Rhian's going to talk to us about a foundational document that is the unifying framework. And then the second half, we're going to try something different this time, break into breakout groups where panel members can really have smaller groups and be able to talk with each other and consider some of the recommendations and ask questions, etc. So all of this information will be used as we develop the strategic plan. So the process is moving along. We're going to be getting an email out to you all about process and getting your feedback about how we can improve our process. But we're so grateful for your participation, your minds, your time, your spirits, and of all the topics that we're going to talk about, today's is the most pertinent. Representative McCarty, I see you. We were in Eastern Connecticut and we said, look, there's this high demand. There's more professional workers coming. Why don't you open more classrooms? Why aren't you opening new programs? And it was like 7 people around the room said at the same moment, workforce. They can't hire the teachers. So we're going to dig into some of those challenges today and think about Connecticut systems to help Eastern Connecticut and every other part of the state with this challenge. I should also mention, and we'll put it in the chat, there was an article in the Connecticut Mirror today about Connecticut and its child-friendly status and challenges that we have, and childcare is featured there. And panel members, you all are mentioned as going to help solve this problem. So pressure's on. So I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague Deb Flis, who leads our quality division at OEC and early childhood, along with Kim Palaska, and her colleague Deb Adams, who's our higher ed guru and professional development guru, to walk you through some great work that our team members at OEC have been working on. Grateful to the team members and also outside experts who've been helping with these recommendations. And just let me stress, these are preliminary. That's why we're bringing them to you. This is a first shot. And we expect, based on the feedback Monday night and feedback from you all, they will be adapted. So here we go. Deb Flis, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be with you. I'd like to acknowledge that the work group, many members of the work group are here with us today. The work group is made up of OEC staff, and if you would please raise your hand on your screen just for a minute so people can see who you are. Thanks for taking that down, Sarah. If work group members would please raise your hand virtually or in reality so we can see who those folks are. Thank them for their work and their ongoing contributions. As Beth said, this has been a rapid and intense process, and we are pleased to bring today a first set of draft recommendations to you. We've also had the benefit of some external partners, including Rhian Allvin, whom you'll hear from in a few minutes. All of these folks have shared their lived experience in the field and with our workforce in their various roles right now. The work group is charged with addressing problems and opportunities in Connecticut pertaining to compensation, recruitment and retention, higher ed and K-12 credentials, professional development, and scholarships. Today, we will be sharing the recommendations from the first draft of Workforce and Quality Work Group. In future panel sessions, you will also hear the recommendations and gather feedback on the other two work groups, the systems and funding and cost groups. This work is not just about developing a plan. We are not just putting out information to develop a plan, but we're also, as Beth expressed, working hard on developing the support from the field for the plan, and why we are emphasizing to you the feedback we're getting from the field and your feedback as part of our process over time to continue to revise and update our work. There are many overlapping elements across all four of the work groups that you see here on the screen. So while we are today focused on the workforce issues, know that you will hear pieces related to equity and access, systems, and funding and cost, and that in those work groups, you will also hear the overlapping pieces around workforce, and that we will continue to communicate across the groups to bring those pieces together with you and for you. Next slide, please. So you see the marker moving us forward. We're here today, June 14, at the Workforce and Quality Deep Dive. On Monday, we had our public listening session. We are very pleased to have had significant participation. We had over 100 members of the public join us on Monday evening. We emphasized and delivered a presentation very similar to what you will hear today, and know that those recommendations and our focus on compensation was very well received. The message resonated well with the provider community, and it helped us to engage them in a conversation about solutions related to the three buckets of recommendations that we will review today. So the public has had an opportunity to weigh in. You'll hear some of that today, and we'll continue to integrate that into our recommendations and our work with you. So this today represents the second of the 4 deep dive sessions. These preliminary recommendations will continue to be discussed as we move forward, and we're pleased to share them with you today. I'm going to turn over to Rhian Allvin, who is going to give us expert comment and review of the unifying framework, a significant part of the recommendations that you'll hear today. Good morning, Rhian.
Good morning, Beth, and good morning to Deb, and good morning to everybody, Beth and Deb and everybody on the panel. It's wonderful to be with all of you this morning. I know I had a chance to meet some of you when I was up in Connecticut in May, and I'm going to do a brief kind of grounding and framing of the unifying framework, given that it's become such an important element to where Connecticut is headed with the recommendations that are being provided to you today. And I just want to say that this framework sits in the context of all of the deep work that's been done by the National Academies of Science and Medicine that first came out with the Neurons to Neighborhoods report in the early 2000s, framing the decisive science that undergirds what early childhood educators have to do. And then in 2015, the Transforming the Workforce report that, again, 700 pages worth of documentation that says there is a discrete, defined, decisive pedagogical knowledge and understanding of how children learn, how they develop, how you identify delays, how you start thinking about math, science, and reading, and language, and literacy, and social emotional development, that has to be done by an individual who is grounded in the pedagogical science of early childhood education. You will not get all the return on investment that we all talk about all the time, if not for having folks who have credentials and degrees in early childhood education. And so with that, at the time I was with NACE, and we were tasked with organizing the profession across the country to have a response to this. And so the unifying framework is the result of 3 years of work. We joked that we sat in the basement of NACE for 3 years, but there were 15 national organizations represented, from Head Start and 0 to 3 and family childcare homes to the teachers unions in the K-12 community, and organizations like NACE and 0 to 3 and Childcare Aware of America. We had an iterative process, so there were thousands and thousands of people who weighed in. Every few months, we did a survey out to the field. We did 500 focus groups across the country. We oversampled in high need communities and very ethnically diverse communities to make sure that this was owned by, defined by, and presented by the profession, period. We felt very strongly about that. And it would be worth your time, actually, even if you read the executive summary, to do a little look into it. But the impetus for this work and the direction was that we have no organizing framework. Every state does it differently, defines quality differently, organizes the professional differently. Every program defines it differently. Every funding stream defines it differently. You could be highly qualified in one state, move to the next state, and you start from scratch. And so there is no organizing framework. And as part of that, we have created unnecessary complexity in how we think and do this work. So the meat of the unifying framework says you've got to fully fund this profession, and compensation comes first. It also says that you have to define meaningful roles for what early childhood educators have to know and be able to do. There's got to be complete clarity and straightforwardness in the system. And we've got to unwind. We have to take ownership of unwinding the unnecessary complexity that we've created. So as a result, in 2020, we stood in front of the Capitol, and it was like a bit of a Quaker meeting. We met until we all agreed. So all 15 organizations came out, endorsed and supported the unifying framework. Model legislation has been drafted, model regulation has been drafted, and now the Commission is working with states across the country to adopt this framework. We were very clear that we're sitting this in the context of an underinvested in profession, and therefore this framework has to come with the necessary supports for folks to achieve these goals. We've got to create realistic time frames and grandfathering policies so that everyone sees themselves in this, and that compensation is at the center of all of this. We promised early childhood educators we would not layer in any more competency requirements or even change competency requirements without first saying this has to be tied to professional salaries, health insurance, retirement benefits, and a structure that recognizes the profession in what it does for society. Okay, next slide. So to be just clear, here's the vision. It's very straightforward. Each and every child beginning at birth has the opportunity to benefit from high quality, affordable early childhood education delivered by an effective, diverse, well-prepared, and well-compensated workforce. We studied many, many other professions and saw that nurses have done this well in their 3 layers of the profession: the nurse CNA, the LPN, the RN. Social workers have done this well. Speech pathologists have done this well. Education, not so much. So we're recommending we not follow the path of how K-12 has been organized, but to look to other sciences and professions and how we do this. But this is the simple, straightforward rationale for why we are doing the work that we are doing. Next slide. So what's the structure and kind of what does the model legislation create? Basically, what the structure says is that there is a defined, unique scope of practice for early childhood educators. And you can see on the right side of this slide, the unique role in society that early childhood educators play. The proposed plan in the unifying framework is that early childhood educators would hold a license to practice in their state, much like beauticians, much like pharmaceutical technicians, much like electricians, and in some of the construction trades, much like nurses and nurse CNAs, would hold a license to practice at one of 3 levels. That everything else that sits around that would not matter anymore. And so what would only matter is the ECE1, the ECE2, and the ECE3. And we see this as a teaching team with equally valuable roles that build on each other. We're trying to also kind of get past this nomenclature of like lead teacher and assistant teacher and kind of create this team environment where educators see themselves as part of a larger team affecting the development of young children. So the license to practice would be at 3 levels, ECE1, which is equivalent to 120 training hours, say post high school. So again, think like nurse CNA sort of level. ECE2, which is an associate's degree in early childhood education, or an ECE3, which is a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, or an entry-level master's degree. We would see down the road really further defining what advanced practice credentials look like a nurse practitioner kind of role, but we're not there yet. We need to get ourselves straight related to here. Again, associated with all of this is that at each of these 3 levels, there's a compensation structure that matches the level of professional credentials required and matches the level of complexity of the work, and that is something that has to be baked in to how these models are built. The idea in all of this is that states pretty uniformly and whole cloth adopt the model legislation. We recognize that there will be elements that will need to be modified slightly, but the more states align to one vision, the more there's reciprocity. What we want to have happen is that if I am a ECE1 in Vermont and hold a license to practice and I move to Connecticut, that I can show my credential to Connecticut and we're done, good to go, I'm working the next day. Or I'm an ECE1 and I am so inspired by this profession that I want to get further education and I'm going to go after my associate's degree. And in that instance, with my associate's degree, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm building on the credential that I have at the ECE1 and only have to take the differential of coursework to get me what's between the ECE1 and the ECE2 so that it's stackable, it recognizes existing competencies, and it's easy to follow. I'm either an ECE1, an ECE2, or an ECE3. So that is the nugget of the framework. I will also mention that the framework sits next to another document that is equally as important, that are the professional standards and competencies for the profession. And within those, there in the back of that document, there's a scope of practice for each of the 3 levels of the profession. And my point in telling you all of this is that we as a country and as states in early childhood education have spent millions, tens of millions of dollars making this all up state by state by state by state. Based on evidence, it's good work, it's research, but what we're saying is, let's align this and put our money into compensation and salaries and benefits and the state of the workforce, rather than all of these complex structural elements that sit around the workforce. So that is my 2 cents. I believe you wanted me to spend a little time answering questions if anybody had them.
That'd be great. Rhian, I just want to jump in for 1 sec, because panel members who don't work in the field might not understand that right now Connecticut has an incredibly complex, hard to navigate pathway to being a qualified staff member. And my guess is we have hundreds and hundreds of staff members who have exemptions to meeting the qualified staff members for state funded programs. And so I think, to understand why we're recommending the unified framework, you'd have to understand that we have a sort of discoordinated system now where providers don't feel a pathway. So I don't know if Deb Flis or Deb Adams want to weigh in on that, but I think it's hard if you haven't worked in the field to understand sort of these complex structures we've set up that aren't aligned and don't have clear steps. But I felt the need to mention that so panel members have that as context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Beth.
Yeah.
Questions?
Jamie.
Yeah, hi, Rhian. Thanks for the summary. It all makes a lot of sense to me. I'm reflecting though a little bit on one of the public forums that I attended at Norwalk Community College, and I recall quite a strong positive reaction when one of the panel members commented that we need to stop or reduce the amount of certifications needed in the education system, and that it was almost too onerous and we were relying too much on pieces of paper and degrees for our educators, and that wasn't really something that was helping the situation. Again, what you're proposing here to me as somebody in business, it makes complete sense, but I'm just wondering if the working group talked about that feedback and whether that played in at all to the recommendation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can start and then turn it over to Deb and the team. So as I see, I think we've got to separate out K-12 education and early childhood education. I mean, in most instances across the country in early childhood education, the requirement to work is to have a high school diploma, be fingerprinted, be free of tuberculosis. And the credentials that exist and the trainings that exist don't lead to anything. So there are many, many, many professional development opportunities, and you can get trained in trauma-informed care. You can get trained in, the ACEs, our conscious discipline. There are all these kind of one-off trainings, but they don't lead to anything. They lead to better knowledge. They absolutely lead to better knowledge. They don't lead to anything related to any competence, any compensation adjustment or kind of professional structure. So imagine if nurses, for example, had all these trainings in how to stick a needle in and how to take a temperature and all of that, but there was no structure around it. And I think that's where some of the frustration comes. That's number one. Number two, I think the other thing that's absolutely clear is that when you do get a degree in early childhood education, you go from maybe, and I'm making this up kind of, but not really, from like making $10 an hour to making $11 an hour. So what we heard in these thousands and thousands and thousands of surveys and focus groups we did was, thank God someone's finally recognizing us as professionals. We are all in. If it's simple, if it's clear, and if there are benefits to us for doing this, we can do it. And I think that's where we've got to work on kind of the language we use and how we think about what this looks like.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Fran.
I was just thinking, for me, as a former superintendent in a large city, I would say to you, Beth, to your point of being in the field and understanding it, I have to say it was so confusing to me. And so I am thrilled to have a the thoughts of a unifying framework. I also think that it is incredibly hopeful in that you begin with 120 training hours, and I'm already seeing possibilities for our students at the high school level, for
Exactly.
example,
Yeah.
for career pathways,
Exactly.
where they could certainly enter into level 1, but many could achieve level 2 if they desired that. And my mind is running ahead, but I'm also thinking about the scholarships that could be available through aspiring educators to move those from level 1 to level 2. And I love what you said about the fact that one builds on the other. So I take my 120 hours, and it's not so daunting to become to have an associate's degree. So it's not so much a question as, oh, thank you, because I just think it makes life much more understandable. And I just see tremendous connections to K-12.
Yes, Fran, I really appreciate you raising this point. There are two things. One, with our community colleges, and I see Kit has her hand up. She can talk to this, are trying to work with high schools. Monette Ferguson, whose hand is up, also has been innovating in this work in Bridgeport, trying to work with the high schools there. And then I think we want to dig in, and maybe you and the superintendents can help us with this, with how can you get child development to count as a full science credit? Because child development is a science. There are laboratory settings. But I think right now it's sort of like one of those half credit extras, but you could help students get these hours, get exposure to the field, where the community college has reported to us yesterday, there's a 65% drop in early childhood majors in the past. Kit can tell us how long. But so I think this high school point is a really important one. And to your point, Rhian's conversation about the unifying framework, it's not so daunting. What we're finding is getting in the pipeline is too hard, and we're not recognizing the skills of folks who have 120 hours, who have the ability to make a huge difference in children's lives and are making a huge difference. So I really appreciate that. Kit, and then Monette, or Carmelita, sorry, I know you've.
No, that's
if you go by Kit anymore.
No, good morning. It's fine if you call me Kit. It's a name of endearment. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so I just have a follow-up. Just some comments. So follow up on Jamie. Your concern, yes, I heard the same concern at Norwalk. There were a lot of people saying that, why do we need bachelor's degree? But I think we need to look at that on two different ways, two different things. One, people are complaining why they need to get a bachelor's degree because there's a lack of scholarship. Some of them can't seem to get the scholarship. I know we had scholarship with the registry with OEC, but I think we need more. That's one. And then two, it goes back to compensation. As Rhian said, after they get their bachelor's degree, their increase is only $11 an hour. So why go for a bachelor's degree? And three, most of the bachelor's degree programs that's offered by the 4-year leads to certification. So therefore, if they lead to certification, we lose them, because then they go to public school where they will earn $20 an hour. You see, so it's so hard to really pinpoint where the problem is, but I think the focus is money. It's compensation, it's scholarship, and also trying to figure out. And I think at Norwalk, we had guest speaker, wherein he talked about thinking about, how do we really define quality? Is quality because we have the people with a bachelor's degree and certification, or quality because of what they have in interaction? So, that's one thing that I've been thinking about, is how do we define quality, and how, yes, I would like to have my associate degree students to move on to bachelor's degree, but then we lose them to public school because of the pay, because of the
Yeah,
compensation. So
Thank-
that's one.
yeah,
And
thank
then
you. Kit.
two, to follow up on Fran. Fran, we have a, I don't want to boast, but in Hamden High School, when you were still there, I was working with,
Please boast, please boast.
I did work with, your the Hamden High staff. And we actually ended up having, to work with the faculty there to, for example, child development. Beth, you mentioned that it be considered as a science. We were able to give them credit for a psychology class.
Great. Yeah,
And then the faculty also worked into, anyway, the bottom line of it is that when those Hamden High School students take the series of courses, they get 9 credits. Now, this is where the problem is, and I need the help of principals and superintendents, is that counselors do not encourage them to go to community college. So they lose that 9 credits because they may go to a 4-year who will not accept those 9 credits, but it will be accepted at the associate's level. So they come into us, I give them 9 credits because the process is the faculty from the community college, we approve the syllabus, we approve the faculty. We they have to follow the same guidelines and qualifications that we require from community college. So my third point, I'm sorry, is that talking about the relationship between community colleges and 4 years.
yes,
Okay,
totally.
I'm not sure if anyone in the call is from a 4-year. That has been the struggle, and it is still the struggle.
Thank you, Kit.
that- For
Yeah.
example, infant toddler courses. I would love to have all the students take infant toddler courses, because most of them end up in infant toddler programs not knowing about, methods and techniques, or,
Right.
how much do we talk to babies. The problem is students are not taking the infant toddler courses in the associate degree because it just goes in as an elective in the 4-year. So
Yeah.
why take an elective compared to
Yeah.
the required course? So-
Exactly. I think we've got to get those,
Yep.
I think
We
we've
need-
got to get those together.
Yep.
And I think that's a good recommendation from the panel.
Yep.
We have 2 more hands up, Dr. Ferguson and Dr. Johnson. And then we'll move on to the next step. If that's okay. Dr. Ferguson, good morning.
Yes, good morning. 3 really quick points. One, just like to look at this with a equity lens as well. Love the model, very simple, does not necessarily create a lot of debt. We know who works in our field right now. These are Black and brown women that are parenting, that are trying to raise wealth and trying to build their families. And this model may speak directly to equity when it comes to folks entering the job force with an actual chance and not so much debt. Also, really quickly, I'd like to think about taking the existing system. Folks have worked years. I'm one of those folks, 20 years in the field, many work groups, many free hours of labor, still giving free hours of labor. Just wanting folks to understand that that work can be braided into a new system, and all is not lost. All is not lost. We can take some of the old, blend it with the new, and make sure folks really get uplifted with this. And it has to be new, right? We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting to get different results. Finally, the high school pathway, amazing. We do it here at Alliance at Harding High School in Bridgeport. Those students, they earn 3 ECE credits. Housatonic Community College is embedded in the high school. We offer them the $15 an hour, also hire them full-time in the summer, and we hire these students if they're looking for employment. Right now, 100% of these Harding students are working for us. They're at Housatonic, they're earning credits. Housatonic has extended free scholarships to these Alliance scholars so they can continue their early childhood education and become higher level professionals. So it can be done. It is a specific partnership. It's about relationships. And I like this model. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. And I appreciate your innovation in this area because I think we should really, maybe we can send some description of the program to panel members so they can sort of visualize it. Dr. Johnson, then Representative McCarty.
So I'll be real quick. I'll just say I really like the model, and I'll preface and say a person with 4 college degrees and 3 certifications, I know in my profession in pre-K-12, that does not equal quality. So I actually appreciate the value that we're putting on people's experience, right? And we're using that experience as a pathway if people want to go get a degree. Beth, no, I often caution that pre-K-12 system is not the model, right? As far as how that goes, like that is not the way we should be going. And yes, I'm not biased because I'm a part of that system for 23 years in many roles. But I will say, I do like the idea, how do we actually start to build better relationships, right, with the high schools? I always tell people our workforce are in our high school classrooms. And if you don't start there, then we miss the mark every time, right? And how do we actually unpack our mind with this thought process that a degree means quality, right? I used this with Beth and I, we spoke, I said, listen, most people on this call, even if you didn't have a college degree, I could teach you how to teach a young person how to read in 4 to 8 hours. And that's not to discredit, right, my scholarship and the things that I've learned over time at the university level and that I teach. But we're talking about very specific skills that I don't believe necessarily need to be directly connected to a PhD, right? So I'm just naming that. I am not downplaying the work that people put in around scholarship, but I do understand there are very specific skills, especially, I just don't want us to get to a place where if you have a baby, you need to have a degree, right? Like, that doesn't make sense. A mother should not have to go get a degree to have a baby, right? So I'm naming that because sometimes it feels like we're going down that road.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Johnson. And I'll be honest, your comments, starting at the first meeting have been a guiding light in some of this work. So I appreciate your reiterating and elaborating. Representative McCarty, then Karen Long.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner. First, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to receive this model today and all of the great features that we've heard. I'd just like to go back for a minute and just emphasize, I think it's important that we continue to work within the system that we've built. And this last session, as you know, we had all of the scholarships, apprenticeships. So building off of that, I want to follow up on your comment that perhaps we could find a way within the 25 credits that are already demanded of our students to use one of those credits. And I know Fran was very helpful this last session. We looked at financial literacy and how we could embed that in, but not adding to the already demand that's already there. So I'm very interested in helping with that to see if there isn't a way that it could be a STEM perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. Awesome.
I think that would really do a good recruiting and retain. And I don't want to get too far off topic, but we also put in a pilot program to look at building a new high school, an aviation high school. So maybe an education high school, a pilot program in that regard might be something as we continue to go forward to think about. But I can't tell you how pleased I was to hear today about also being able to carry the reciprocity is a big piece, I think, in all of this. So thank you for everyone who contributed to the unifying framework. I think it's great work and I'm very excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McCarty. And an example of why we don't need to do everything ourselves in Connecticut. And if we can join in with some national thinking and give our providers credentials that are portable, it's respectful of the workers who put in the time and right now you can graduate with a 4-year degree from UConn and go teach in Massachusetts, but not here in early childhood. There's just so many complexities where we join in with the national movement and be part of the leadership there. I think we can make progress, and we will take you up on that child development request. I'll send you, Representative McCarty. Commissioner Russell Tucker sent me a listing of all the child development offerings around the state and the different ways that it's offered and what that looks like. I think this committee might benefit from that. Maybe I should just send that to everyone, because I do think that is part of the trick. And the only bill I ever filibustered was a high school because of all those requirements that were pushing kids out of interesting classes and putting them in classes that weren't so easy. So I think this could help in 2 ways. Karen Lott, and then we're going to move on. After that, if Eloisa, get ready for the breakouts after Karen. And Karen, that's not to rush you. We want to hear everything you have to say, because you are in this every day and trying to interact with our current system.
Absolutely. So I just have a very quick comment that I wanted to weigh in on some of the discussion around experience somewhat versus credentials. And I believe both are equally important. And if we want to raise the professionalism of the field, we just can't say, well, oh, you love children and you've worked with children for 10 years. So, hey, come on in and be a lead teacher. It's not going to get us to where we want to be to raise the professionalism of the field. And if you think of every other professional field, even in education, K-12 education, you just can't walk through the door and say, hey, Fran, Ms. Superintendent, I love kids. I want to teach first grade. So we can't minimize this down for our youngest children at the most critical time of their development to say that credentials don't matter. Education is power, right? And I've been in K-12 education. And I know you can have the most credentialed people in a classroom who aren't skilled to teach. So I don't think they're one exclusive to the other. Right. We're going to raise the professionalism of the field. We have to have credentials. I can't walk into someone's building site and say, hey, let me build the next house on this plot. They're going to say, where's your credentials? So for whatever we need to do in this society, really, there is an expectation for credentialing. And I don't think it should be any different for early child care, childhood education. And if we don't address the credentialing piece, we're going to miss the opportunity to raise the visibility and the respect that the early care and education field so desperately needs.
Yeah, thank you. This was incredibly helpful. Your feedback and your sort of, Rhian, thank you for the presentation, because this is at the core of this work group's like recommendation. You need something to build on. And I think folks can hear the tensions there. And so many opportunities, and we don't have to do all the work. There's model legislation. This is going on in many, many states. So Rhian, I don't know if you want to say anything before we move on.
Just one final, this is such a great, I'm so heartened by the complexity of this conversation and the simplification of it at the same time. The only thing I want to say is I think there's an enormous opportunity for the Blue Ribbon panel, both in Connecticut and to set a national example, to, I think, for a whole set of reasons beyond anything to do with Connecticut. There's this tension has started between, it's an all or nothing thing. It's like a bachelor's degree or anyone who walks in the door, as Karen was describing. And that is A, not helpful, and B, that's not what anybody's proposing. And to have these defined, people are scared and want to see themselves in this. They want to be acknowledged for the work that they've done. And the vast majority of people who we interviewed want the degree. And so to say from a public relations perspective, and that we are stopping this high stakes bachelor's degree or nothing sort of conversation and saying there is a role at 3 levels. All of you are valuable in this profession, and we're committed to compensating you aligned to each of these 3 roles. And there's a clear pathway to get through it. Would be a massive win for early childhood educators, for kids, for Connecticut, and it sets the stage for how the rest of the country, quite frankly, needs to behave.
Great. Okay, thank you, Rhian. I think we needed that reframe. What's going to happen next is we're going to walk through our recommendations. We're actually going to run through them. So I'm going to ask Deb Adams and Deb Flis. We want to emphasize a conversation. So those were really important reflections. Then quickly through our recommendations, and then there'll be more time either to ask questions or dig into those recommendations in breakout groups. So I'm going to turn it over. I think Deb Adams, you going first? You're muted, Deb.
Thank you. Yep, sure. This is going to be like speed dating. So buckle up. So if we could put just the next slide up, and we can just like run, right through them. Compensation, as Rhian mentioned, is first and foremost. And we already started to dig in really about some wonderful recommendations and some wonderful conversation that we're going to have in the breakout groups. But we just wanted to kind of pull back together and say, listen, none of this is going to work. None of it is going to work if we do not address the central component, that big gear in the middle for compensation. We just won't move forward. It's like the gear in your car. The car won't work without the central mechanism of those gears working together. Next slide. So bringing back to the goal, right? Develop and sustain that equity-driven, skilled, diverse, professional lead educators and program leaders that are prepared and fairly compensated to meet the early childhood education needs of the state's children and families. It all works together. It's about professionalizing the field, as you so eloquently said, Karen. Thank you for that. Next slide. So again, bringing compensation right to the forefront. So there are 3 recommendations we're going to sort of speed through before we get into breakouts. Compensation being the central component we're going to breeze through and then get into breakouts and talk more deeply about, is connected to professional pathways and technical assistance and recruitment and attention. And again, professional pathways and technical assistance and recruitment and attention will not work. No one wants to come to the field if they can't stay in the field and earn a living wage and be compensated also with benefits. It's not just about the wages. It's also about the benefits. And who wants to continue their learning in a profession that isn't compensating them for it? So these are the 3 like high level recommendation buckets that Beth alluded to in the beginning. Compensation being our first recommendation, professional pathways and technical assistance being our second, and recruitment and retention being the third. So we're going to quickly go through, and I think Deb Flis, you have the first one talking about compensation.
I do.
Awesome.
Ready? Thank you. Okay. So as Deb said, there are 3 buckets. Compensation is the first, and intentionally the first, and positioned as the lead set of recommendations from the work group. There are 4 pieces of our compensation recommendations for you. The first is to update the existing compensation schedule report to build a compensation plan that addresses the true cost of care study. So understand that those 2 pieces were not done at the same time. They were created separately, and they need to be aligned and updated to current day based on what we've learned about the true cost of care from that study. The second piece of our draft recommendations on compensation are to adopt the 3 educator levels. I think you've explored that a little bit, and we'll be interested in the discussion to hear more of your thinking on that. The third piece is, as Deb said already, to consider strategies for improved benefits associated with a compensation package, such as paid time off, healthcare, dental and vision, retirement, and to explore other non-traditional benefit options. And finally, to socialize or to share more broadly and to build understanding of the importance of the structure of the profession and its value to families and to children's development. In other words, to help underscore the importance of the work so that there is support for compensation and there is support for the valuable societal contributions that early childhood education is making to our children's development and to our workforce, both by helping parents work and by building the future workforce. I'm going to turn back to Deb Adams for the next set of recommendations.
Great. Thanks, Deb. So we turn to professional pathways and technical assistance, and here's where you see they are connected to the compensation piece, right? That very first bullet under professional pathways and technical assistance, thinking about restructuring Connecticut's early childhood credentialing and certification system to make sure that we are aligning with the unifying framework, definitely tied to, I think, the first or the second bullet in the compensation slide. And we already started to think about that all together as a group. We're going to dig more into it in the breakout sessions. Thinking about those underlying competencies, right? We really didn't get into the beginning of the conversation about, well, what is it? What are those competencies that all our early childhood educators need to know and understand? So adopting the NAEYC professional standards and competencies for the basis of that design in higher education and in our professional development in-service system. So speaking of the in-service system, we need to fund those pathways and fund the technical assistance that is needed both at the higher education level regarding faculty. We need more faculty. We need tons more faculty to do the job. We need in-service folks. We need technical assistance providers to do the job on the ground to provide in-service in the field. And we actually started to think about higher quality professional learning, both in higher education and in the field. Next slide, please. All of this then connects to recruitment and retention. So you've got compensated folks, you've got people who are engaged in lifelong learning. We want to recruit more people and we want to retain more people. So how do we expand the introduction of early childhood? Y'all started to talk about it. High school. Let's think about those pathways in high school. Think about those on-ramps. Think about apprenticeships, right? Think about how to get people involved. Leverage directors as the leaders. We're recommending, let's think about leadership. Let's think about those leaders that are moving into the field, that have been in the field. How can we learn from those experiences and think about leaders as the face to providing recruitment strategies? And then marketing strategies. How do we market this now that we've got this new system, revised system? Retention. How do we keep folks? Deb brought that up in the compensation. Paid time off, healthcare, dental, vision, retirement. Thinking about those pay scales and the mobility and thinking about steps for experience and ongoing professional development, and create those career pathways which utilize those partnerships with colleges. There's lots of great stuff going on in Connecticut. And I think, Monette, thank you so much for your comments. You know, we don't need to reinvent the whole wheel. We need to reinvent maybe the vehicle in which the wheels are attached. Okay, so let's think about what we can take from the system. Let's think about how we can, adjust and move on. And we need your great ideas to do that. So we're going to dive deep right now in our breakout sessions, and Deb, Flis, and I are going to help you work through some questions to do that. So I'm going to turn it back over, I think, to Eloisa to describe how we're going to break out into groups.
Yes, thank you for that. So we are going to break out into rooms. It's as even as possible of the panel members and then members of the public to be there. But just as a reminder, this is for panel members to discuss and ask questions about the recommendations. And if panel members could turn on their cameras if they're in a position to do so, that would be great. I'm going to now open all the rooms. So see you in a bit.